racing. When most Massachusetts residents hear those words, they think, how cruel. After all, they voted in 2008 to shut down the state's dog tracks by 2010. But many voters weren't informed, and to this day still don't have an accurate perception of greyhound racing. If the decision were reversed, Massachusetts would experience a number of economic benefits and would regain a timeless piece of the state's culture. A day at the dog track was once as American of a pastime as a day at the ballpark. The first and most important step will be informing the public about what the racing industry is really like. Former Greyhound owner Troy Wylie took a trip to the now neglected Raynham-Taunton Greyhound Park to tell his story.
Haven't been back here in years, and looking around, it's kind of depressing. One of the common misconceptions were that these animals were treated inhumanely. I mean, the reality is they weren't treated like your pet Labrador Retriever because these were working animals. So they were treated just fine. I mean, you know, they had to be in peak performance, top condition in order to win races. I remember one time I fried up, I went to Stop and Shop and fried up about 75 to 100 hamburgers the night before. And I had 4 frying pans going on the stove, and I said, tomorrow morning I'm going to give all the dogs a treat with their regular meal, and they went crazy over the hamburger.
It seems unusual that people lambast greyhound racing for supposed cruelty, while horse racing, a sport with a nearly identical premise, is celebrated.
If anyone thinks anything's inherently cruel, I would say maybe horse racing slightly more, because they have a jockey, and the jockey's whipping them and telling them when to go and when to slow. And a dog, you put them in the race in the box, and you open the box, and they go after that lure, and they're excited to run. You don't cattle prod them or zap them to go. They just go because that's what they want to do. I've even seen some retired greyhounds come here, and when you're walking them around on a leash, you got to be careful when the race goes, because the lure makes a sound, and the retired greyhound goes bananas to try and jump out on the track with his friends out there. So
even if the dogs were treated well and were eager to race, what would be the benefits of bringing racing back? Are there any? The answer might surprise you.
So from an economic standpoint, it's a pyramid trickle-down effect. So, when you shut the business down, you're not only shutting down the people who own the dogs, the purses they make, the people who work in the kennels and the helpers, but think about it, the food supplier. Someone has to supply all that food for all those dogs. So the food supplier, the farmer, the people who work at the racetrack, just generated a ton of revenue for the state of Massachusetts based on the tax dollars, because every dollar that was bet was taxed at a certain percentage, and that tax went directly to the local towns and neighboring towns and whatnot. So it was tough. I mean, really devastating. Don't really understand why in 2000 it was voted to stay, and then 8 years later it got on the ballot and it was voted no by a narrow margin, and then now that's it for the rest of life. I feel like it's 1-to-1. They should have a third vote to decide, but
In order to spread the message that the Massachusetts ban against greyhound racing should be repealed, strong allies will be needed. Organizations like the National Greyhound Association, which has been operating for more than 100 years, can help bring some credibility to the movement and help spread the message. Perhaps more important will be getting the individuals impacted by the ban on greyhound racing to unite and speak up. The first steps will be creating social media groups and spreading the word via media outreach. If you are watching this video, the plan is working. But one video alone won't bring back greyhound racing. Supporters of the movement will need to pool their resources. This doesn't just include their money, but their voices as well. If greyhound racing is ever going to return to Massachusetts, people need to band together and speak up in support of it.
So for the people that would say, would voted against it, I would say, if you had never been to the racetrack, why would you vote against it? It was a statewide referendum, and people out in Agawam and Springfield and Belchertown and that have never even been to Raynham, Massachusetts or Wonderland and Revere, they voted against it.
Remember, if you've never visited a track, try not to jump to conclusions too quickly. They hold so much economic and cultural value, and the dogs are truly excited to be there. Greyhound Racing's door may be closing quickly, but it's still open.